Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Corinne. I work with the Drexel Climate and Sustainability Initiative, and this year at Drexel is Climate Year. This is a year for us to celebrate, support, and catalog all of our ongoing climate work happening at all levels of the university and at the Academy of Natural Sciences, as well as launch new initiatives to make combating climate change central to our institutional practices, curriculum, research, and civic engagement. One initiative has been this Climate Year speaker series, where we highlight work from different departments, faculty, staff, and alumni throughout Drexel and the Academy of Natural Sciences. Last month, we invited alumni that attended the climate change negotiations, or COP, in Madrid in 2019 to talk about their experiences. And next month, our session will be the Global Council of Climate Leaders, an experiment in teaching climate policy. We'll share a link to register for that session at the end of the session today. So today's panel was inspired by many conversations we've had with students at Drexel that are passionate about the environment and climate change, but are having a hard time finding that co-op or that job after college that addresses these existential challenges while also helps them build skills and prepares them for a successful career. I'm not going to say that there's simple solutions out there. I know that these jobs are competitive, they're hard to find, and they don't match the growing interest and talent in this field. But I'm so excited that today we'll have 4 incredible Drexel alumni sharing their stories of finding that space, some of their own internal struggles that they're managing in their work, and what their perspectives are on this growing sector of sustainability and climate change. Before we get to the discussion, I'd like to note that as part of Climate Year, while we build an institutional strategy for climate and sustainability at Drexel, we're doing our best to bring a justice lens to this work. And in that spirit, I'd like to acknowledge the land which Drexel University is on, Lenape-Hoking, which was the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape. The passage I'm about to read was written by the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nation. The Lenape people lived in harmony with one another upon this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were removed west and north, but some also remain among the continuing historical tribal communities of the region. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tamanend that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine. So with that, I'm going to introduce and then turn the floor over to our moderator, Liz Schwartz. Liz is a senior co-op advisor at Drexel Steinbright Career Development Center. She advises students in the College of Arts and Sciences, Westfall College of Media, Art, and Design, and the School of Biomedical Engineering, as well as employers participating in the co-op program. Among the students, Liz advises our environmental science, geoscience, and environmental studies and sustainability majors who are eager to pursue careers where they can make a positive change on our environment. Liz, please take it away.
Thanks, Corinne. I'm excited to be moderating today's conversation with this awesome group of alumni panelists. So to begin, I'll be introducing each of our panelists, and they'll give a short presentation about themselves, how they got interested in this field, and a little bit about their role. And so our first panelist today is Emma Snelling. Emma is a first-year material science and engineering PhD student in the Natural Polymers and Photonics group under Dr. Collin Cavote. Her research focuses on incorporating industrial food waste into polymer composites for sustainable packaging applications. She previously graduated from Drexel in June of 2021 after completing her BS in chemical engineering and her MS in material science and engineering through Drexel's BS-MS program. Thanks for being here today, Emma.
Thank you, Liz. So as Liz said, I am both an alum and a current student. So I am within the Material Science and Engineering Department under Dr. Collin Cavote. We are trying to move a little bit more to sustainable work in many aspects. Our main focus right now is trying to find a way to improve plastic recycling. So the graph on the left shows that since recycling started in 1980, only 9% of plastics have been recycled, and of that 9%, only 14% have retained their quality. And as the graph on the right shows, there are millions of tons of plastic waste being generated industrially, while that number is staggering, it does show the large range of opportunity, as industrial plastics tend to have fewer contaminants and are easier to recycle for processing. However, since there is such a large loss of quality in the recycling process, we are trying to address ways to do that while also keeping the recycled polymer having a lower impact. And so we have found that using industrial food waste, specifically cranberries, brewer's spent grains, and coffee grounds, you can both find a waste stream, a place to put the industrial food waste other than a landfill, while also improving some of the properties of our composites. So for my master's thesis, I worked with cranberry pumice and a polymer and just incorporating it as more of a proof of concept. And now my PhD project is hopefully to explore exactly how it works. So different types of food waste have a lot of different functional components that are left behind after you make the food product that can improve different properties. And so kind of just trying to fill a niche there. I initially started my time at Drexel as a chemical engineer looking to go into pharmaceuticals. I spent my first co-op at Johnson & Johnson, and I remember we did a tour of their lab and they were talking about how they had figured out they could line the reactors with plastic and then at the end of the reaction, remove the plastic and burn it. And they were excited about this because it reduced contamination for the reactions. And I was appalled. I was like, how is that the solution you have come up with? And after that, I just realized that I could not work in pharmaceuticals. I needed to do something more sustainable. And so I switched to my higher degrees in material science and engineering. And the first meeting with Dr. Schauer walked in and she was like, oh, I'm trying to use food waste in polymers. I was like, oh, perfect, I'm in. And that was 2.5 years ago. And then she convinced me I wanted a PhD. And so I'm still here and excited to talk and hear what others are doing in the sustainable space.
Thanks so much, Emma. Our next panelist is Kaya Moon Gentile. As a sustainability analyst at Hines-JPMC, Kaya is focused on integrating sustainability into all facets of facilities management of the JPMorgan Chase portfolio of New York owned and leased real estate. Her responsibilities include designing, coordinating, and analyzing various sustainability operational initiatives from centralized waste management to urban beekeeping. Kaya applies her 3 years of traditional environmental engineering and consulting experience to drive pragmatic triple bottom line solutions for clients. Since joining Hines in June 2021, Kaya has been instrumental in launching innovative technology pilots, leading sustainability education initiatives, growing trust in sustainability programming, and standardizing it for new scales and markets. Thanks for joining us today, Kaya.
Thanks so much, Liz. Like Emma, I started as an environmental engineer at Drexel. And I know that everybody at Drexel is always talking about their co-ops and how they got to their post-grad opportunities. So I was just going to show a quick series of pictures that I think really explain my kind of mishmashy experience. I started with my first big endeavor at Drexel was I was going to try my hand at bees. So I joined some bird research, came to really love birds, and that'll come back to be applicable in a moment. So here's me holding a bird. We also, hold on, here we go. My first co-op, it worked for a very traditional land development, site coordination kind of engineering firm called Nave Newell. I learned so much about business principles and how to be a good employee and a good colleague. But really, I was just designing underground stormwater chambers, and that kind of left a little bit to be desired, as I feel like we've encountered a lot in our engineering fields, but that's what co-op's all about. I was a big member of the Sierra Club at Drexel. Gotta give a shout out to all my Sierra Club friends. It's actually where I met Emma too. And this is all around Trump's America, where climate became really a hot topic and we all needed to wrap our heads around it. So I think that this is a pivotal era in my time. Then Sloan, my good friend, and I, we go to Costa Rica. We fall in love with ecology. We take the intensive course to learn all about tropical ecology and butterflies. And, I think another layer to the color on what really inspires me. And then we went to the COP23. So I know that we had our COP26 this year. I think that a lot of things have changed even since COP23. Like when we went there, there were no companies, for example. And I'll get to that, as you can see behind me. But we had a really cool time there, but we started really inspired. And by the end, we kind of felt a little bit doomed that we had heard from so many scientists tell us that we're just, it's not a good story, not a great outlook, but there's a lot of hope. I worked for the Philadelphia Water Department, where I was in the ecological restoration group, where we were doing some pilot studies to put mussels back in our rivers of Philadelphia, do some stream restoration projects. But I definitely felt a little bit more ambitious than the water department could offer me, and then took myself to a consulting, like a new kind of consulting. In that period, I also do my senior design project at the Woodlands, where we had a little weather station. We were designing a stormwater retrofit for the historical woodlands in Philadelphia. But all through that time, I'm not allowed to talk about what I did because I was on a forensic litigation consulting company where I had a little NDA, but I can tell you that we were studying very intensely the sewers of Portland, Oregon, where there's a major 14-mile Superfund site. And I learned a lot about working really hard, a lot of hours, and a lot of document review, and it felt very deep brain, but it really didn't add up to me feeling like I had a real impact on my work translated to real outcomes. So I got a little tired of that and took myself after graduation, and I moved to New York City for my next job, where I now work for Hines-JPMC, which manages, it's a global real estate company. They have investment, they have facilities management. I work on that facilities management side, and JPMorgan is our client. We are in the headquarters of JPMorgan in America, where, Jamie Dimon, the CEO, sits, and I actually saw him yesterday, which was crazy. But we are taking our first boots on the ground to try to make a little culture shift of the operations of these buildings. It's never really been an imperative, aside from the obvious that you could save a lot of water and energy, and that's savings of money. We're kind of having that pivot where sure, saving money and saving energy are really great, but it's also a great way to engage your employees. It's a great way to feel better about your impact on the environment. And it's a very complex kind of multi-stakeholder initiative that we're doing, but we, are having a lot of fun, and I'm doing a lot of coordination. But here's our bees, for example. This is like our flagship project, is that we have bees on 2 of our buildings in Midtown, and they've made honey for us, and it'll taste like Midtown. And we'll be giving it out, and really finding that the bees program is a really inspiring way for the JPMC employees to take their first toe into sustainability, because once you tell somebody that there's bees, there's living creatures, there's ecology happening in your building, is really, I can see it behind their eyes that they're like turning on how they can live a more sustainable life as well. We're also doing plant walls. This is like a biophilic design initiative where we're trying to have better indoor air quality. We're trying to have better feelings of serenity and tranquility in your work environment, and especially as we're all up against that return to work phenomena that no one really wants to come back to the office. So it has to be a lot better. It has to be more sustainable. It has to be more enjoyable. It has to be more hospitable. That's what we're all working against. And then we also have some really interesting properties in our portfolio. This is on top of our airplane hangar where the private jets go in and out of, but it's a LEED certified building, and it has a green roof, and we manage our wind turbines on there too. So it's really pulling from all of my experience. And to that bird point, we're going to turn the lights off so we don't kill the migrating birds during bird migration season. We have a lot of ambition, and it's been such a cool job. That's enough for me, though. I'll let go on to the next.
Thank you so much, Kaya. Our next panelist is Collin Cavote. Collin is the founder and CEO of Biome, a technology company that enhances the health of indoor environments with modular and automated ecosystems. Collin founded Biome while studying biomimetics in the custom design major program of the Pannoni Honors College. Before Drexel, Collin spent nearly 5 years living a low carbon lifestyle, working on farms with artisans, foraging, and living off the grid. Today, Collin lives in San Francisco, California, where he operates Biome, a public benefit corporation and certified climate neutral hardware company. Thanks for being here today, Collin.
Thanks, Liz. It's a pleasure. And it's so nice to see some familiar faces that I haven't seen in way too long. Really great community here. I graduated from Drexel in 2015 in the custom design program, which really changed my life. I originally started school at Temple University, right into a business school program, just going after capital. And then I had a major existential crisis about what business was doing to the world, and went off grid and found a lot of value in the natural world and natural systems. Was ultimately a little dissatisfied. I felt like I had escaped all of these kind of institutional systems that are kind of taking us into a risky climatic place, but I wasn't contributing to anything meaningful as a result. And so I found that escapism, although kind of personally therapeutic, probably isn't going to be what gets us all across the finish line together. So I decided to eventually come back, and I was looking for an academic program that could encapsulate all of these learnings from the natural world, all these personal motivations and goals for creating better solutions for the world into something to study, and just wrote a program called biomimetics, which is to study biology and then to try to mimic it. And then I met Kevin, and we found a major opportunity for a custom degree, and I got to study how plants metabolize air pollution. And ultimately, it led to creating, as you can see behind me, robots essentially that we're using to grow plants and generate fresh air in indoor spaces, especially as we're looking at pandemics, wildfire smoke, the fact that we all live 95% of our days indoors, where we're cut off from nature, our mental and emotional health is really suffering. We see the value in the future where climate is becoming more aggressive, for the need for us to foster healthy internal environmental spaces. So we're really kind of on this edge of climate livability. How do we all want to actually exist in a climate environment in the future, which is destabilizing? How do we remain healthy and optimistic and be able to do our best? And then as we do this, as we create hardware and robots, how do we do that in a way that can support supply chains, the environment, et cetera, long term? So happy to address on some more of that as we go along.
Great, thank you, Collin. Our final panelist is Maura Jarvis. Mora is a proud Philadelphia native who is passionate about working with her local community as a community outreach specialist for the Philadelphia Water Department. Her role on the public engagement team includes informing North Philadelphia residents about the city's green stormwater infrastructure program, Green City Clean Waters, drinking water quality in the city, and related sustainability initiatives. Mora holds a degree in sustainable product development from Drexel University and strives to be an advocate for environmental justice and stewardship in marginalized communities at home and abroad. Thanks for being here today, Mora.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I loved my time at Drexel. I love coming back. So this is awesome. Again, my name is Maura Jarvis. Currently, I work for the Philadelphia Water Department. But I think, just to give some context about my experience and how I got here, which is very interesting, I think I'll just start from the very beginning. People always ask me, how did you get involved with sustainability or have an interest in climate change or environmental studies? And to be perfectly honest, I don't know. From a very small age, it was something that I was passionate about. I remember chastising my mom about recycling plastic bottles when I was like 8. And I was the president of my ecology club in high school. And when I got to Drexel, I funny enough, started in the design and merchandising major in the Westfall College of Media Arts and Design, because I was interested in fashion as well. But, you know, as time went on, I felt that there was maybe a little bit of a disconnect between where something that I'd been passionate about since I was a child, you know, sustainability, and the fashion industry and what I was learning in my major. And perhaps maybe there might have been a way to combine them, or at least make it so they weren't at odds with each other. You know, because at one point I was in this design and merchandising major, but also I had taken a minor in sustainable architecture. And so it was sort of like competing ideals, I guess. And then I found out about the custom design major, like Collin, and it was sort of like a light bulb went off. And that's how I ended up with a degree called Sustainable Product Development. I studied a lot of different things, environmental studies, communications, business, product design, and I loved it. And it took me a lot of different places. My first co-op, I worked for a very small zero waste consulting firm. And we did anything from, you know, waste assessments for commercial buildings to, you know, providing zero waste services to festivals. And that was very rewarding to me, obviously, like seeing sort of like the end use of products and food and things like that. And then my second co-op, I went abroad. I worked for Thompson Reuters in Hong Kong. And they're a media firm, but it was an exciting place to be because they typically, I think they're like in the top 10 telling underreported stories, and a lot of them did have to do with the environment and climate change, but also, you know, things that I don't think that people are very much aware of, but especially in the Asia Pacific region, there's, you know, a lot to be told about supply chain management and ethical sourcing and manufacturing of goods that we use here but are made over there, and also the use of slave labor. So, you know, I worked over there to plan an event where we were essentially connecting C-suite executives and journalists and nonprofits to sort of like combine their efforts to combat all of these things that sort of have to do with supply chain and products, fast fashion, all these different things. And that was really eye-opening and rewarding. And it just sort of like gave me a very global perspective on, you know, it's not necessarily just about what's going on here, but we're all connected in some way. And the climate it does that. And finally, I returned home and I had one final co-op to sort of like wrap it all up. And I wanted something that gave me another look. Like, I feel like I've had a lot of different experiences with different aspects of sustainability and touched on different pieces of it. And finally, I, you know, was hired by the water department as a co-op in the public affairs division. And I was sort of just helping out with a lot of things, but particularly with the Green City Clean Waters program, which has a very robust community outreach component. And this program is it's a long-term plan, a 25-year plan, in an agreement between the City of Philadelphia and the Environmental Protection Agency that we will implement green stormwater infrastructure in the city, because without it, our sewers are actually designed to pollute our rivers with overflows because of how much stormwater runoff we get with all of the impervious surfaces in the city. And so, you know, I obviously now I still work there. So everything worked out. It all sort of came full circle. I worked as a co-op for 6 months and then they hired me full time. I've been there for almost 6 years, which is crazy to say. And I think this is a really special opportunity because, you know, green infrastructure is really fabulous. It is a climate change adaptation program. And so not only that, but my work is in community outreach. I speak to people on a very basic level about green infrastructure, sustainability, climate change, flooding. And, you know, just there are some communities that are dealing with, you know, it's amazing, really, to be able to talk to people about something where, you know, it might not have ever been something that they considered before, or, trying to explain to people the benefits of how this can sort of improve their lives, and get them to see the bigger picture. And ever since I started at Drexel, or even since I was younger, just communicating with people and talking to them about sustainability and sort of bringing them into that narrative is something that I've always just been passionate about. And that's what I get to do in my job today. So I guess we can move on to questions and I can elaborate further.
Thanks so much, Mora, and to all of our panelists for these presentations. We're now going to begin our panel discussion. I have a few questions for our panelists, but I'll also invite our audience to add any questions into the chat. Corinne is going to help in gathering those for us. And so if we have time, we'll try to get to as many of those questions as well. So our first question is, how are you addressing and thinking about climate change in your day-to-day work? And what are you most proud of in your work? And I know in Zoom, it can be a little tricky for panelists to know when to jump in. So why don't we start for this first question with Emma, and then Collin, Kaya, and then Mora.
So it's a little difficult for me to answer this question because I am still at a very exploratory part of my PhD project where I am trying to define what my project even is. And so my main focus is obviously on the pollution of plastics in our industry and their effect on climate change. But at the end of the day, I'm still really focused on the science, and I can't really gauge whether or not my work will impact climate change positively if I don't even know if the science behind my idea is valid. So I mainly at this point am kind of just doing a lot of more science than climate change, but at the back of my mind, every time I do design a project, I do have to incorporate what type of checks and balances I would have at the end to ensure that I am actually doing, it would be a sustainable end goal and not just another drag on our ecosystem. So mainly focusing a lot on microplastic formation and how that can affect different ecosystems. But it's a little difficult with research to address climate change every day, but it is more something on the back of my mind. But what I think I'm most excited about with my work is the idea of using different waste streams to create a final product that would replace something that is so detrimental, but also so relevant to society. Like, we can't get rid of plastic and we cannot get rid of single-use plastic, but we can make it better.
Cheers to that. Yeah. At Biome, one of the lenses through which we look at is taking a long-term approach to thinking. And that's really hard to do in a startup and in a business environment very frequently, because short-term profit and the existential risk of running out of money or whatever is always right there. But I think that's one of the responsibilities we have as humans right now in the state of the world, is to force ourselves into that long-term view, embrace that systems thinking, and kind of take the time to imagine what our future state needs to be, rather than thinking about what we're capable of right now. And that allows us to, I think, create the space and bandwidth in order to hopefully get to that future state. One of the things that I'm really proud of that we did as a very, very early stage startup is go through a material list of all of the different chemicals of concern that are often found in products, whether that's PVC, whether that's lead in electronics. There's this massive list of the chemicals that really shouldn't be in anything that comes in contact with people. But Congress has never regulated chemistry in our consumer products. So there's about 60,000 that have never been tested on humans that show up in our products. That's also partially why indoor spaces are 5 times more toxic than outdoor spaces. So we wanted to create a product that is helping people live healthier without actually emitting toxins into their environment, right? So we decided to really enter this red list and remove all these chemicals of concern. And it turns out it's really freaking hard to do that. we had to find special paint formulations in order to paint the external part of the product. We had to source electronics from European manufacturers where they have more stringent manufacturing processes. All these things had time, cost, engineering. But at the end of the day, we created the first technology product ever certified on Earth to be free of red list chemicals. So we beat companies like Apple and Google and every other tech manufacturer out there to actually produce something technologically sophisticated that isn't going to poison people at the same time. And we're really proud of that.
That's fantastic, Collin. And I think to that future state phenomena, that's exactly what I work on too. I would say that the scope of how I'm every day fighting climate change is really an elephant in the room that JPMorgan Chase is the 4th largest bank in the world, and they're not going anywhere. Just like single-use plastics, they're not going anywhere, but they are a major consumer. And it's the magnitude that I think is so special about what I do every day, is that this is I have the opportunity to save 10 million pounds of trash, 10 million gallons of water, 10 million kilowatt hours of energy, like tomorrow. And just like how I told you about how we were in Sierra Club and we had a lot of really great initiatives. We had like $100 budget. I do have like $1 million budget at my fingertips to make these things happen. And that is new and fantastic. And I'm so glad to see that is finally becoming a priority for these places. And that future state is really what I am going for every day. We're in this, the strategy department where, today we have a water audit where we find out that we have plenty of touchless fixtures. And for example, we just fitted them. But there's the idea that those touchless fixtures prevent you from overflushing, but we installed the touchless fixtures that still flush 6 gallons instead of 2 gallons. And that's a today thing. And what we're going to plan for the future state is that when we do our next retrofit of these, 40,000 bathrooms or 14,000 trash cans, or, even in a single building, having 50 parking spaces, how many of them could be electronic vehicle charging stations? Like the magnitude is really what's cool about what I do. And that makes me really proud that I have a real physical felt impact on that consumption. And while I can't change personally, not yet at least, that JPMorgan Chase is the #1 investor in coal mining in the world, I can't do anything about that. But what I can do is, prevent 14,000 trash cans from being just thrown in the trash once we set up new ones, or, thousands of birds crashing into our building every day. There's a magnitude to what we're doing, and the future state has so much promise.
Okay, let's see. I would say that I have a less technical sort of experience with climate change work. And I think that one of the biggest issues that we're facing now that I try to, sort of mitigate in my daily work is a lack of understanding of what climate change is among people who don't study it, who feel that they may not be directly impacted by it or don't understand what the impacts are. And so, I think the reason why I love doing community outreach work so much is that in my work and my team, we're very passionate about providing the most approachable information in, the best way that can be received by anyone. And, working in Philadelphia, it's a very interesting situation. But again, I think that there really is just a lack of understanding and awareness in how these impacts are going to, what they're going to look like in Philly, and how people are going to individually be impacted in a way that makes them sort of care and not apathetic. I think that there's this fine line in climate change discourse where you can only get to a certain point before people become completely like, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world, I can't do anything about it, and I don't want to do anything about it. And so, you know, crafting that message and helping people understand and doing things in an approachable way, like I said, is so important and something that we really take very seriously at the water department. And, you know, so like, for example, we have this installation called the Philly Water Bar. And I'm not sure, we've had posted research about this and everything, but basically we have survey data that tells us that nearly 40% of Philadelphians are drinking bottled water at home. But, you know, hopefully, I hope everyone on the call knows that the water department actually provides really high quality tap water. And that's set by, the regulations are set by the Environmental Protection Agency. And when you look at the demographic data, the people who are spending the most on bottled water have the least disposable income. So it's very much like an equity issue. Obviously, it has a huge impact on our environment. And, you know, the Philly Water Bar, the purpose is to like pop up in any Philadelphia neighborhood and just have a conversation with people. The same way you would go to a bar, we're not serving alcohol, but you know, you would go to a bar and you'd have conversations with people. You might learn something, you might hear somebody else's perspective. And that's a way that we're able to connect with people, where it's not like you're sitting down in a community meeting talking about lead or talking about the science of climate change, but you know, we can have a real conversation that means something to people. And not to say that I've changed anybody's complete lifestyle, but I do feel that it's been really effective. And so just doing things like that to sort of make the conversation, again, I keep saying this word approachable, because like the idea of climate change is such a scary thing. It's a huge thing. It touches so many different points of our lives. And I think it can just be so overwhelming, and just so like trying to find a way to make that digestible for people is very important to me, so that moving forward, you know, we have more people who are sort of like on our side, trying to work towards mitigating, but also, I mean, at this point, we're at adaptation. So getting them prepared for that is really important.
Thanks so much for all of you for sharing what you're proud of. Definitely makes you feel a little bit more optimistic hearing what you're doing in the day-to-day. But my next question is, what are some of the major barriers and challenges that you face in your work? And this time, why don't we start with you, Mora, going backwards, and then Kaya, Collin, and Emma.
So barriers, I feel sort of a little bit like my answer sort of like bounces off of this one, but basically, you know, in trying to find the best way to communicate to people about climate change, obviously, I think in certain places in the United States and in Philadelphia, I think that people don't think that they are feeling the impacts of climate change, or that it won't affect them. And so because of that perception or lack thereof, then, you know, there are other things that sort of get in the way. I work with, you know, some of the most underserved communities. I'm, you know, in community meetings where people are talking about systemic issues that they're dealing with that don't necessarily have to, everything's connected, but don't necessarily have to do with climate change and thinking towards the future and sustainability. And I understand it's hard for some people to care. You know, I go into community meetings and I'm talking to people about green infrastructure and like save our waterways and things like that. And, you know, there are so many like systemic issues in Philadelphia, like even in just Philadelphia, you know, people are dealing with, you know, we have areas where there drug overdose is prevalent, where people are dealing with, you know, losing their homes and not having access to food, to healthy, fresh food, you know, and gun violence and gentrification, all of these different things. And so sometimes it's hard to penetrate and get the message across that it's like, this is something that we're dealing with right now. And especially through the lens of like the water department. I think I read something somewhere from the US Water Alliance that says that something like 85% of climate impacts will be felt as water impacts. And I don't think that people quite like understand the gravity of that, but it's sort of like a tug of war, trying to get people to look towards the future and understand. And, things are happening even now that are impacting us that are related to climate change. But also, being sensitive to their situation right now, but knowing, what's coming. In Philadelphia, specifically in Germantown, this is the neighborhood that I live in. There are a lot of folks who are impacted by flooding, which is very much exacerbated by climate change at this moment. And, just trying to have that conversation sometimes can be very difficult when people are experiencing property damage and loss of objects that they've had, like mementos and family heirlooms and things like that. So yeah, it's a tough situation for me, for sure.
Yeah, I think that, well, I am definitely working with a different cohort of people than Mora is. I think that that same hesitation and the fact that caring about climate change on like a how it will affect you level, aside from like, oh, we all know how to recycle, oh, we all know that we should walk instead of take a car, ride our bike. Aside from those like kind of topical levels, I am definitely up against the unprecedented nature of climate focused programming in commercial real estate. That this is the Class A, most expensive, most high profile and sensitive areas in New York City, the like commercial capital of the world. So this is like something that a lot of the people that I work with have never had to consider because they're trying to get the CEOs, satisfied with their lunch. But I am also really here to sell on the win-win-win triple bottom line kind of phenomena that are really possible, that if we spend the money right now to have plant walls from Biome put in our buildings, or we retrofit our cooling tower structures and we cycle the water a little bit better, that it also will come with enormous savings over the long term and come with those fantastic engagement opportunities where our employees are happier. The value of the real estate probably even goes up once we put these investments in. I think that I am definitely up against like the philosophical part as well, that like, oh, like that's not going to bother me. It won't happen until next year. But the hesitation is something that I encounter every day, and I just smile and say, let me show you something. Let me show you how, just, explain the scale of what we have the power to change. And everyone's eyes go a little bright and they're like, oh, that wouldn't be that bad. I mean, we have that money. Like, that's the thing here with my line of work, is that there is more than enough money to spend on this. It's just about pitching it, making it seem pragmatic, making it seem approachable to the overserved community as well, because it is something that will affect us all. And they have a responsibility as major consumers to be stewards for their watershed, for their block, for their employees and communities that they, the Midtown world, the New York City world, the world of banking. Like, it's a great opportunity. And I just try and sell that every day, even if they don't listen at first.
I might be echoing both of you so far. I definitely feel and experience short-term thinking, individualism as really driving forces that make it really hard that require us to swim upstream. And I think that barrier, the fact that being climate aware and climate sensitive and proactive is an upstream exhausting endeavor, because we're trying to bring in these externalities and be responsible for them as a group and help other people care for them and be responsible. It goes against kind of all the momentum of the past 200 years of industrialization and growth. And so I think becoming less lizard brained, more long-term reward oriented, more communal, is really essential for us to get through the next, let's say, 100 years. But I think that's going to be a really big challenge. And I think we're seeing a lot of traction with companies trying to integrate more of these components and take responsibility for external factors again. And, you know, I think I'm optimistic about these barriers because at the end of the day, these things that keep getting pushed off, like it's not gonna happen until next year. And a corporation can say it won't happen for 2 more years or 3 more years, but eventually those 3 years are gonna be here. And we will have to take account for them and own them. And I think we will collectively get through that, but we have to kind of overcome our lizard brain, our animalian brain, and enter a new collective consciousness. I don't want to get too esoteric here, but kind of own our human nature together and respect that everyone has the rights to more resources than they currently have.
I might have a little bit of a unique in almost only academia part where our biggest barrier is convincing people to give us money and to get funding, and then also having to get funding from someone you might not want to. Like, we try to seek out a lot of funding from the Department of Defense, and I literally had a conversation this morning with my lab mates about how that can be difficult, where I want to apply for a Department of Defense grant that is looking to have single-use plastic that they can dispose of easier for when they are in other countries and maybe don't want their presence to be known. And that can be a difficult challenge, but at the same time, is the sustainable work we could create with that money, does it outweigh that? And is it worth it? And can we then, if we use that money to produce a product, even if it is for the government, the government does produce a lot of emissions. So if we can reduce their emissions, that is still good in the long term. And then also trying to convince myself that it's okay to use a ton of single-use plastic in doing my research. This morning alone, in the 1 hour I did research in the lab, I used 4 pairs of gloves, which hurts, but it's important. Like, I cannot handle the chemicals I need to use without gloves. And then also I've had an experiment fail every day this week, which means I've just had to dump my solutions in hazardous waste containers. And while that hurts my soul, I know that the end goal will hopefully outweigh it, but it's hard to convince myself it's okay to be doing these things.
Yeah, thank you. So our next question came in from the audience, and it is for Kaya. And it's, do you feel limitations for your sustainability ideas working for a big company such as JPMorgan Chase, either financially, politically, or socially? And then I think for the rest of the panelists to sort of jump in more generally, can you speak to any internal struggles you've had to negotiate between your climate change ideals and career? So let's start with Kaya, and then if we could go Emma, Collin, and Mora.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what I think about every day. And I think what is what's politically aware is that, for example, some of my friends from that climate action protest that you saw me in earlier, someone at that protest, I know that there's a circle where I'm in that circle, and the protesters that came with a boat and parked it right in front of my building a few weeks ago and sat in the lobby and made a big mess for the facilities team, right? That we had to put everyone through the loading dock and all that. I know that those circles overlap. And I know that there is a political and greenwashing front to what my business is doing. And I know this is one of our other questions, but like I got started in environmental engineering because my dad worked for Marcellus Shale oil fracking, and he told me that the coolest people that he knew were environmental engineers, and that would probably be a fun, rewarding, and hard and a little gritty career. But that is definitely what I learned from all of that, is that this is a very complex process where we're dealing with the years of capitalism and the price of all of our goodwill for the environment. And it's something that I kind of wrangle with every day, about how do I make my want that I don't want us to, we shouldn't have trash cans in all of our buildings. We should just have recycling and compost and a very, very tiny little trash bin at our desk. But I know that that is not something that they're ready to do quite yet, but I will work tirelessly until we get that to be the norm. And I do, when we were in Drexel and a lot of our professors were selling us on working for the Department of Defense or working for the biggest names in, the climatic evils of the world, and that there's this prevailing sense that maybe you can work from the inside and change their mind. I think that when I was, first starting, I felt like that was not possible. But I would say that it is possible, and it is a worthwhile pursuit, because no one that I work with from their own experiences and backgrounds really was ready to do it as furiously and passionately as I am. So I'm really here to push the envelope on that. And I promise to all my panelists here that I'll, do my best every day to make this, a more sustainable place to work and live and bank and, kind of big stuff that I do think about a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I touched a lot on this in my last response about how you are having to use funding from sources that I might not agree with and that I feel like are not necessarily using it for the right causes. But then also the idea that if we accept funding from someone and at the end of the project they like it, they can bury it. If we are using governmental funding and they want to keep it just for themselves, and it could, instead of putting it out to industry, and it could have a bigger impact, and having to wrangle is that worth it for now to be able to get what we need done? And then also at the end of the day, that I could do an entire project for 5 years and have it do nothing, and being okay that that is still important work because someone else might have explored that path and now we know that doesn't work and can learn from it and move on from that.
I certainly feel the pressures of growth and the pressures of capital needing to get more capital as quickly as possible and as much as possible. And it kind of goes against sustainability, quite frankly. And, that rings really true with fundraising, right? Capital flows to places where it will grow the fastest, right? And so if you're working on a really hard problem that requires a lot of maybe upfront capital in research and development, like Emma, or if you're building maybe machines to sequester CO2 or something on the frontier edge, those are not going to be as profitable right away as an app, which has very low overhead. And so what we're trying to fight against is this the ease in which capital flows to capital light organizations and companies, to things that are just short, faster growing versus the things that our species probably really needs. And in order to kind of overcome that, there's just this deep requirement to really focus on the story, the messaging, the values, and to show that there's demand in the market for these additional layers of the business. But it's really pervasive. We have been really fortunate to find a few people in the investor community that have actually been able to liquidate fossil fuel assets and are turning that into a future forward. They see a dying industry. So I think there are sources of capital. They're seeing we're approaching this inevitable transition, and it's time to restructure. And so I think there's definitely some good signal, and we've been able to find some of that, which has been really rewarding and allows our mission to continue. It's not the norm quite yet, and there is a lot of greenwashing, but hopefully that capital will continue to, as these kind of sustainability organizations and processes start to return dividends, there'll be more momentum generated to beget more investment. So, yeah.
Just to be quick, because I think I think what the next question will be is more about advice to the students and things like that, which I want to get to. But I would say that I feel I'm pretty lucky in my career because the water department is a very progressive and innovative organization. And so usually if we want to try something, or, we've always been like very sustainability minded, like even since the 1800s, the water department has been seen as an innovator in water infrastructure and that sort of thing. So, I personally feel like there hasn't been anything major that I've like struggled with, outside of working with the community. But in terms of my actual job, I think it's really fabulous and I have a nice experience. So, with that, I think we could go to the next thing.
Thank you. And yes, my next question is regarding advice. And this question came in from the audience, Katie Barak. If there was a piece of advice you would offer to current Drexel students hoping to follow in your footsteps, what would it be? And then I would just further like to add, if you could also speak to where do you see career opportunities just generally growing in this industry? And this time, let's start with Collin, then Mora, then Emma, then Kaya.
I have a few pieces of advice for those students wanting to look at climate or consider it. Personally, one thing that was very valuable was taking some time off from school to really get a pulse of the world around me, what's happening, to find what I'm passionate about. Because I think ultimately going into climate requires a level of passion and a level of persistence. And that's been, a valuable part of my story and my personal discovery. Not everyone needs that. I think beyond that, having great advisors that can help us learn about the markets or problems in the world, provide some guidance, really, really key. And then I think the third part is looking for the gaps between traditional disciplines as major sources of value creation. And, really learn this in the custom design program. A lot of our problems are the result of societal problems, are the result of this kind of siloed thinking. And when we can actually connect those silos and maybe multiple silos, we can literally create new disciplines, new ways of thinking. It is, I think, the way to kind of transcend this siloed thinking and the way the problems are currently structured. I think that's a really powerful way to look at the future. And yeah, I really encourage students to try to find those spaces in the real world and also through academic settings. And then what was the last part, Liz?
Where do you see career opportunities growing in this industry?
Bioproduction of materials, using organisms to create the things we want, and replacing fossil fuel feedstock is just, it's just so emerging and really, really powerful, whether that's using fungus to grow things or bacteria. For better or worse, I think there's going to be a major development in genetically engineered plants and microbes to continue to create new and novel materials. So I think that'll be huge. And then I think waste broadly, whether that's too much CO2 in our air, which is basically just a waste product that we've got to manage, or waste in our landfills and ecosystems, microplastics. I think looking at technologies and solutions to harness that and manage that is another second big opportunity.
I would say, number one, I do just want to emphasize that if you're interested in sustainability or climate change, in terms of your studies or your interests and things that you get involved with, I would very much like to see more of a push in also understanding equity issues or inequities in climate science, sustainability, the understanding and everything, because nothing happens in a vacuum. And again, like going back to my thoughts about, trying to have conversations about climate change with people who, have other things going on, like real life issues going on. And, I think that a lot of the work or a lot of the conversations have been, not as, they haven't expressed how complex the issue is sometimes. I've been able to go to a few conferences and like speak with folks from other cities and other countries where, there are so many layers to the situation, in which I feel like there needs to be an equity component that's sort of like included in the conversation of climate change, that sometimes I feel like isn't had. So I would say definitely to supplement your studies in sustainability, also with equity, and also just in terms of like opportunities. I don't know if people realize this, but Philadelphia has like a pretty solid agenda around sustainability. And if you're looking for opportunities or you just want to know what's going on in the city, there are a lot of different things going on. We have an Office of Sustainability, and I think they just actually put out applications for an environmental justice advisory committee. So there are lots of things that you can do like in the city of Philadelphia that will result in changes where you can feel like you're doing solid work. So I would say certainly look out for those sort of things. And in terms of careers, I mean, the one thing that I have noticed is that there are a lot more environmental communications focused jobs than I am at, like, than I would have thought. I mean, certainly it wasn't something that was common even when I was looking for that last co-op, when I applied for the water department. That was the only like environmental communications sort of job that was available. And now there are so many of those sort of positions, and it's so important because, to be able to communicate effectively, such like a massive problem. Sorry, the mailman just came. That's my dog. In order to communicate like effectively and get people to change their behavior because of what you're telling them, is such a powerful tool. So I would say, if you're the type of person that likes talking to people, likes educating people, likes the idea of stewardship, and that sort of thing, then certainly that's an area that's growing, in my opinion.
My biggest piece of advice for students would definitely be not to restrict yourself. I came into Drexel, chemical engineer, pharma, like that's the end goal. And then first co-op obviously gave me the opportunity to realize I did not want to do that. But then I felt very restrictive in the chemical engineering curriculum, in that I felt that they were really pushing their students to be process engineers at pharma companies, at oil and gas companies. And I was like, that is not me. So I had to leave my own department and seek out another department. And while it did make my time at Drexel a lot more challenging in terms of the workload, it made me, I felt so much more passionate in the work that I was doing. And I would never have found that work if I didn't just email 20 professors and set up a bunch of meetings and be like, what are you doing? Like, what kind of work can you get into? And just talking to people. And I do not shut up about my work and environmentalism, and I like continuously talk about the same points, but then I get to meet other people who have that same opinion, but aren't as outwardly open about it. And that kind of just gives me hope and all that, and just to really reach out to a lot of people, be okay to leave your own major and your own circle and seek out. In terms of jobs, I'm not really sure. Part of the other reason I got a PhD was because I felt that the jobs that I wanted required a PhD, but then also that there wasn't a ton of spaces. So I was like, oh, I'll just do this for 4 years, and hopefully there will be more. But I would say that it does seem consumer push to more sustainability, even if it is companies greenwashing, it is causing a change. Kaya's work obviously is showing us that we are pushing for more, and hopefully companies will recognize that. Hopefully the governmental policies will recognize that. And so I think also smaller companies, startups like Collin's, will hopefully get to gain more traction and more support and kind of create more sustainable spaces for everyone, and so that we are not dependent on larger groups funding that are not doing it for the right reasons. We can have funding that is for the right reasons.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, I think I'm gonna actually answer them in opposite form. The two places that I know that the job market is growing, at least from my own experience, is one, in the waste world. Just like Collin said, that the companies that polluted our earth that we walk on are coming to terms via the EPA and from a lot of other push that it's now the time to start making some moves and clean it up. And that's what I worked on at the Superfund site. And I know that, for example, like the Willamette River is going to be a 20-year engagement where there's a lot of money and a lot of labor and a lot of hours spent. But unfortunately, on that front, you do probably have to sell your soul and work for the Fortune 500 companies and spend your waking hours, at least I did, coming up with who put the mercury in the sewer and how did it get to the river. So that's at least one area where I know there's lots of work to be done. The other one that I'm a lot more positive about is that there is, I think, a reckoning happening that a lot of the spaces that we occupy, a lot of the cities that we live in, we can all stop accepting it as this is how it's always going to be, and we shouldn't expect anything more from them. I think that in the operations world, in the commercial real estate world, that sustainability is going to be nothing but more important as we go on, because they have an enormous footprint on our world, and the impacts that they have are kind of unfathomable. So I know that there's work to be done in that space, at least personally. And if you are interested in that, I would love to talk some more about that offline, because I'm looking to like gather more people, at least in my department, that this is the time is now, and almost everything that we engage with, our phones, from our offices, our commutes, can all be made a little bit better, a little bit more sustainable. So I know that there's stuff to do on that. On the front of what I would advise to students, I would advise that you apply to jobs that you don't have the amount of experience that they list. I applied to this job that I have now that said I needed to have like 5 to 7 years of experience in sustainability. And I think that there are people who have 5 to 7 years experience, but they're probably not entry-level jobs. So I would say that while they want you to be experienced, I think in the sustainability realm, it really does come down to passion. And when I had my interview, I just kept selling it and kind of showing that I was ready and eager, and a lot of that enthusiasm really takes you a long way. So don't be hesitant to think that you don't know enough about this, because this field is so evolving, and you'll find that niche, like Collin said, where you will find a place that your experience, your like long and varied Drexel experience will definitely, there will be a crack for you to fill in. I'm sure of it. So don't worry about how much experience they want you to have. That would be my one bit of advice.
Thanks, everyone. And this is our final question, which came in from the audience, which is, what kind of governmental policy, i.e. regulation, oversight, investment, subsidies, would be most impactful for your work? And how can we best get involved to advocate for that policy? And because we are sort of getting towards time and closing, if any of the panelists would like to chime in by also, when you're answering this question, share any closing thoughts, please feel free to do so. And I think we can close with Emma, Collin, Kaya, Mora.
So I have to be honest, I do not know a ton of governmental policy, as it has not ever been something that I have been drawn to, but I do think that a reduction of fossil fuels for sure would force, as Collin said, other bio-based materials. There are a lot of bio-based polymers currently that do exist, but they are definitely lacking in properties and such, but the draw towards them is not as important. So things like that. And then also better waste management. So not allowing single-use plastics to end up in landfills. Plastic bans are not my favorite, as I do think that if you ban plastic bags, you then create, if you have reusable bags that create just as many microplastics and actually do it faster. So it's worse for the ecosystem. Also does, as Mora has talked about, it does not deal with a lot of the equity issues in more urban areas. And so needing to look more at how we can help without changing people's mannerisms instead of forcing it and just broad bans and such that do not address all the issues. The solutions that then arise are not better. And then just closing thoughts, like if anyone is interested in work at sustainable work in a research space, I know I have a lot of connections, a lot of different things, not just what projects I'm working on that I can help you connect with, and then also kind of how you can apply different degrees and into different work. And you don't have to stay in your major, you can explore.
I guess that's me next. Okay. I think one of the ways that I often see legislation or change happening is by allowing companies to think long-term. And I see that happening by forcing companies to have a second bottom line. Right now, executives at companies have one legal responsibility, which is to make an organization profit. And if they don't, they can be fired. So we have really perverse incentives for leadership. And there is a solution. It's a public benefit corporation, which is a legal second bottom line that a company can register. And if your executives make less money, but fulfill a second bottom line, they're actually legally protected. And I think that's incredibly important for companies which do control most of the power in terms of what consumers even have access to as solutions. And I think providing tax incentives for PBCs, for public benefit corporations, to incentivize companies to actually be more responsible could be a powerful tool to create more change. I'm also a huge fan of like bottoms up change, but I also feel like there are a lot of ways that consumers and people on the ground don't even have necessarily access to the right choices because companies aren't providing the tools or the products or the lifestyles in which we can all live. So I think that's one way that we can try to break this short-term profitability cycle a bit and allow some more inclusive business practices to happen. I think that'll be pretty valuable. And then I think one of the things to kind of leave with that I often find hope in is that we kind of as a species accidentally got ourselves here. We kind of stumbled into all of these major problems just kind of by being blind and short-sighted, right? We just haven't really taken ownership of this. And I think what our species collectively is really good at is trying to address something consciously and really owning it and moving beyond it. And so I think we're probably going to be a lot more powerful consciously trying to solve this stuff than we were accidentally stumbling into this situation.
I love that thought. That's what I'm definitely going for too. A little bit more purpose to what our day-to-day lives have. On the policy front, I think I'm lucky to be working in New York City, where there is the most local laws. That's how it all kind of comes out to be. Some of the most stringent guidelines on commercial real estate waste, water, emissions, I think that that's really fantastic, and that's what I would love to see happen for more cities, is to have more laws on the book that say that if you are this amount of space in your commercial real estate, that you must collect compost and you must use one of our affiliated vendors that we have vetted and found out that they'll actually be putting it in the right place. They won't just be burning it, or they won't just be putting it into the landfill. So I think that the expansion of those policies that bring in more realms of our life, our day-to-day life, and make it more sustainable, and do it in a way that's like phased. No one's asking to cut emissions tomorrow, as much as we all would like that to happen. A phased approach is a really great way to sell on that second or that first bottom line, Collin, right? Is that there's a pilot and then it works, and then we try harder and harder, and we grow that momentum. So I would say that the policies that include more facets of our life are what I would love to see, at least for commercial real estate. And closing, thank you so much. This has been so fantastic. And I would love to chat more if anyone's interested.
Okay, just to keep it short, I would say that in terms of policy, I just feel like we sort of need like a reframing of how things are, how funds are distributed in all levels of government, sort of like reallocating. There are priorities in places where I don't think they should be. And obviously, anytime a politician gets up there and talks very passionately about climate change, it's sort of like, it's almost like they're the counterculture or something. So I feel like there needs to be like a mindset shift. And, of course, I mean, I think anything as far as the water department's concerned, I think the work we do is great, but there's only so much that we can do because we're ratepayer funded. So we don't get any subsidies from the federal government or anything like that, which people think that we might. But yeah, I mean, it's just prioritizing the environment is something that I would hope, will become more of a thing, I guess, in the future. And yeah, this was a really great opportunity. Thank you so much for all of your kind words in the chat. And I'd love to connect with everybody on LinkedIn or anything. So thank you.
Great. So I'll close us out, I think. Thank you so much, Liz, and our panelists. Was so exciting. If you didn't get a chance to check out the chat, please do. There were some really lovely, beautiful comments in there. I just want to give a plug to our next Climate Year Speaker Series, our next and final for Climate Year. On December 2nd, we'll be having the Global Council of Climate Leaders, an experiment in teaching climate policy. This is Dr. Ali Kenner's class, Cities and Climate Change. Her students will be presenting their projects featuring self-organized working groups and publicly available artifacts that can be used to learn about and address climate change. There's a link to that in the chat. Thank you again, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And it was so lovely hearing from these wonderful Drexel alumni. Thank you so much.